Hello and welcome back to the Stellium Astrology Podcast. I am your host, Stephanie James, and I am the founder of StelliumAstrology.com. I used to write horoscopes for Elle magazine. I teach classes for the London School of Astrology, and I am here today with you because we are going to be talking about the personal planets in the zodiac, in the solar system. So I just wanted to say thank you to quite a few people who've got in touch with me. So I had a lovely message on Instagram, which by the way went into my requests, which meant I didn't notice it immediately. I don't really know why Instagram does that, but maybe it's kind of like the spam box. But yeah, I got a message from Myra. I think it's Myra. So hiya Myra, thank you for getting in touch all the way from Australia, just to say that you're really enjoying the podcast and asking if I'm going to be doing some stellium episodes according to the house they're in. Yes, I probably will. It's going to be, this project is going to be kind of a long one, I think, because it's going to be a bit more of a kind of cookbooky type of podcast. But yeah, it's just lovely to get feedback from people, you know, telling me that they're enjoying the podcast and also, you know, giving me ideas of shows that I can do. I also got an email from a message on Instagram from Jess. So I just want to say hi, Jess. Thank you for getting in touch. And Jess also has two cats. I have two cats too, Lana and Archer, if you hadn't noticed. Lana is currently surveying the kingdom outside from the windowsill. She's not normally in here with me, so I think she's sulking and looking out the window. She's got her ear turned towards me as to sort of say, I can hear you talking about me. And Archer's in the other room. He's been getting a little bit humpy lately. I didn't even know cats really got very humpy. But yeah, he's been a bit weird and humpy. So thank you, Jess. Jess has two cats called Cookie and Bear. And it was lovely for you to get in touch. Jess, are you based in New York? Or I know you said that you travel and that you sometimes come to London. I'm guessing you're in the US at the, kind of ballpark there, but I'm thinking New York. So it's lovely to get a message from you, Jess. And also I got a few messages from, I think it's Art. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Art. And he happens to know a friend of mine that went to the same astrology school, the London School of Astrology, with me. And he just got in touch to say that he was enjoying the podcast and he signed up as well and submitted his chart. So I have actually managed to catch up with my new charts and go through and basically just go through and just check and see where you guys might fit in. So I've managed to do a bit of that. So I've got some newbies to talk about today. I don't know how many people I'm going to get through, but I just thought I'd give a little shout out to all you guys that have been actually messaging me and saying hi. I also got a really cool book for my birthday called Midlife is Not a Crisis by Virginia Bell. And I've seen this when I worked on the bookstalls at the conferences. I love working on the bookstalls because it's one of the most sociable little places that you can be. You get to talk to everybody, you get to hear about what people's favourite books are, you get to see which books are flying off the shelves quickly, you get to sit at the back and watch all the talks as well. And the conference that I most like working on is the what's it called? It's the ASC conference, so kind of like the Ascendant conference, but it's the Astrology Student Conference, and that is run by the London School of Astrology and the Mayo School of Astrology, which is the principals are Frank Clifford and Wendy Stacey, who I know well from working with them on the stalls, and I've had readings from both of them and I've learnt from both of them in classes. So those are always really great conferences, and they're just usually a 2-day conference or maybe 2.5-day conference in central London. I think they had to do it online this year. Well, 2020 they had to do it online. They'll probably, I don't know what's going to happen this year, to be honest with you. Hopefully we can get back to some sense of normality soon. If you haven't been to an astrology conference, I would strongly urge you to research if you're very interested in astrology, because you'll meet, it's like a whole world that you've never ever even considered might exist. It's quite funny. Just loads of astrologers, and we all get together, and it's like a kind of, I've always described it as kind of like Glastonbury for astrologers, really. Just getting together, going to different talks, and then meeting up with people and going, oh my God, did you go to that talk? Did you go to this one? That was brilliant, wasn't it? Oh my gosh, it was brilliant. So, and the last one I went to was in 2019. It was the last one did I speak at that as well? Yes, I did. I did the Uranus, Neptune, Saturn, Pluto conjunction. I did the Saturn, Pluto conjunction on the Uranus, Neptune degree. So kind of like between 19 to 22 Capricorn, which all happens to be about vaccines and a little bit about viruses and the healthcare system. So it's kind of spot on, really, seeing as that's what we're talking about now since the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. What's the matter, Lana? You okay? Lana might start clawing the carpet in a minute. But anyway, yes, so working on these conferences and looking at the books on the bookshelves is one of my favourite things. And the book I always pick up but I'd never bought was Midlife is Not a Crisis by Virginia Bell. And seeing as I just had my 38th birthday, yeah, I know, I'm getting there. I thought, well, maybe I need to start reading about kind of midlife transits. And actually, do you know what? This book, from what I can see so far, is actually a great book to have from your Saturn return. So anybody who is approaching their Saturn return or has had their Saturn return around 28, 29 years old, this book will probably be quite good for you, and it should potentially give you a bit of preparation, a bit of groundwork for you to start exploring your more of the midlife transits. And it just had some great little things in there that I thought I'd say. So there's a quote here by Ralph Waldo Emerson. "Astrology is astronomy brought down to earth and applied to the affairs of men." I thought that was good. It's just very interesting because it also says, if each planet is an actor in the play, then the signs are how the actors express themselves. The signs demonstrate the styles of behaviour. The moon is always the moon, our heart, our feelings and intuition, but it behaves differently in tender Cancer than it does in feisty Aries. So it gives you a little bit of that, and it goes into all sorts of things. It's got a small sort of cookbook element about it, but it goes into other things as well. And I'm really early in this book, but already I really love the way it's written. It's really accessible. So I would recommend that book if anybody's interested in buying it. Now, that's quite a long introduction to the podcast. Just also to let you know, I do have my Patreon page up and running, so check out the link for Patreon if you're interested in supporting the podcast. And also, thank you to Cara as well, who got back to me and said she really enjoyed the Moon episode. I had a few people say they really liked it, actually, and I'm going to have to go back and listen to it myself because I edit it and then I publish it and then it just kind of goes out of my mind. And this weekend, the Moon was in Pisces, and I just found it such a difficult, real mental battle to actually get anything accomplished. In fact, I didn't get anything accomplished at all, and I had loads of things to do. But this morning, the Moon went into Aries, and since it's been in Aries, I've just been getting loads of stuff done. So I'm just really happy that finally the Moon's moved into a more productive sign for me, because I was just so low energy and so flat. So without further ado, let's just get on to Mercury, because I've been waffling away. So Mercury is the nearest planet to the Sun. And because of this, in the horoscope, it can never be more than 28 degrees away from the Sun. So it will either be in the same zodiac sign or the sign before or after the sign you have your Sun in. So I'm a Capricorn, I have Mercury in Aquarius. Some people may be Capricorns with Mercury in Capricorn, and some Capricorns may be Capricorn suns with Mercury in Sagittarius, but it can't be more than 28 degrees away. And because a sign, a zodiac sign, is 30 degrees, it means that even if you had your Sun at 0 Pisces, it couldn't be, there's no way that Mercury could be any further away than 28 degrees. So it would, at the farthest, it could be at 28 of Pisces, or it would be in the previous sign of Aquarius. I hope that makes sense. It's always quite hard to picture that. It's always really good to see an animation, which I'm sure at some point I can either find, and maybe I could post that up on my Patreon page for my Patreons. But without getting into too much of the astronomical detail of Mercury, it's good to talk about, what Mercury means. But before I do, actually, let me just say that the orbital time for Mercury around the Sun is 88 days. So It is very fast to think that it can orbit in 88 days, but because we are slower, but we're also going around, the way we see it is that sometimes Mercury appears to go retrograde and come backwards, and because it goes retrograde about 3 to 4 times a year, Mercury actually takes about a year to go around the entire zodiac, including retrograde periods. So obviously Mercury has its own orbital period, and no planet actually goes backwards. No planet actually moves backwards. Retrogrades are an optical illusion from our perspective on Earth. So it's a very geocentric perspective, but they still hold some significance, major significance actually. So that's another show completely. But yes, I'm sure we've all heard somebody say, oh, Mercury was retrograde and all this stuff happened. Oh, I'm blaming Mercury retrograde. There is an awful lot of mischief that does occur during Mercury retrograde. And mischief would probably be the key word, because Mercury is a mischief planet. He is known to be a trickster. The Greek version of Mercury is the god Hermes. And he was, the reason he came into existence was because his father, who is Zeus, had an affair with a nymph called Maia. And so Zeus had many affairs, but unfortunately Mercury was a living, breathing, he's a living, breathing product of an affair which Zeus's wife struggled with. It showed that Mercury proved by being alive that Zeus would lead a double life. And that's something that really kind of ties into the story of Mercury, is this kind of duality, this duplicity. There's always one or the other, or there's on one hand or the other hand. There's always choice, there's always variety, there are always options. Now, Mercury rules both Gemini and Virgo. So Mercury rules 2 signs of the zodiac. As you'll find from this point forward, with the personal planets, they all rule 2 signs. So it's quite interesting. In fact, all of the traditional planets rule a couple of signs, but most traditionally throughout history, Mercury, Venus and Mars have co-ruled 2 zodiac signs each by traditional rulership. But we'll see when we get a little bit further down the line how that changes and why. Mercury is the glyph for Mercury. It's like a little circle with a cross on the bottom, so almost like the Venus sign, which is a little circle with a cross at the bottom. But Mercury has 2 little, you might want to call them horns or something, or you could call it a halo, or you can think of it as the wings. If you think of like Hermes, who has wings on his sandals, and I think he has like wings on his kind of headband as well. He has these 2 little signs, and it's almost like a connection with something higher, some kind of knowledge that he's connecting with. And actually, you could say it's like a halo, but it shows that there's a lot of analysis and there's a lot of thinking process and intellect there. And usually with mercurial types, particularly Geminis, I find that they look mercurial in a way you can sort of see it in sometimes in their hair, the way they wear their hair, sometimes just in their face and just in their body. Mercurial types generally are quite slim, usually because they're constantly thinking. And because they're constantly thinking, they're struggling to, they don't always think about eating. Food kind of doesn't always enter their head. I have to say, I'm not the skinniest, definitely not by any stretch of the imagination, but I am somebody who tends to forget to eat because my chart ruler is Mercury, so it makes it a very important planet in my chart. It rules my ascendant, and it feeds into a lot of major planets in my chart. So I do forget to eat. I forget to... I literally have to prepare my meals in advance. I usually batch cook, and then I've got stuff prepared, and then it's a case of if I'm working and I've got a routine, I'll remember, okay, I get to this time I'm going to eat, I get to that time I'm going to eat. But when it comes to the weekends, it's just everything goes out the window. I forget when I'm supposed to eat, and suddenly I'm starving at some point, or I'm grouchy and I don't know why I'm grouchy, because my brain and my body are a bit disconnected because my mind is constantly ticking. And that's often with mercurial types. They are not really thinking about the body as such. They're thinking about what happened yesterday, what they're going to be doing in 3 weeks' time, their big list of things that they have to do, particularly Virgos with their lists. But I am not a Virgo, and I make lots of lists as well. There's always something that they're juggling, and Mercury is the juggler. Mercury is definitely, if you think of him as a character, he's definitely like the jester, the court jester. It's the mischievous Loki, who is Thor's brother. If we think of Thor as Jupiter, we will talk about that later on. I always think of Loki, whether this is right or not, as Mercury. He's a trickster. He also is a bit of a shapeshifter. He just loves creating problems and being cheeky, and it's interesting to think that Jupiter and Mercury rule opposite signs. So Gemini is opposite Sagittarius. Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter. Mercury rules Gemini, and with Virgo and Pisces, Virgo is ruled by Mercury and Pisces is ruled by Jupiter traditionally. And I think of that Jupiter Mercury as a kind of a seesaw, a kind of like a mischievous, playful seesaw. And I often think of it as kind of a bit like Thor and Loki. If you've ever watched the Thor films and Tom Hiddleston, he's such a great Loki. Like he just plays it so well. To think that Tom Hiddleston actually went for the role of Thor, it's interesting. I mean, I couldn't imagine him playing Thor. I think Chris Hemsworth is good for the Marvel films, but I still don't think he's like the best choice for someone to play Thor. I don't necessarily think he is, really fitting. He is very good. But I think Tom Hiddleston is amazing as Thor's mischievous brother who's not really blood related. But anyway, I'm going off on one about bloody Marvel again. This seems to happen whenever I talk about one of the films. So I can't really get into too much about the mythology. I'm not au fait with all the mythology. I usually get them all mixed up, so I don't want to get into it too much. But in different mythological tales, in the Roman, it's Mercury is called Mercury. In Greek, it's Hermes, and and in Norse, it's Loki. So yes, I think it was Mercury. And yes, the archetype is the messenger. So actually, anybody who is quite mercurial will often be somebody who likes to spread a message. The upside of that is that they're quite knowledgeable. They've got good knowledge of lots of things, but they might not have too deep a knowledge of things. So they might be a bit more of a, they know a bit of everything, a bit of a jack of all trades, master of none. Which is good. It's good to have good general knowledge, but to have like a real area of expertise might not be the case. But that's what Mercury does. It likes to collect information. And if you think about its function in Gemini and Virgo, we have to think firstly that from doing our zodiac signs, Mercury is an active masculine sign. So it's much more aware, conscious, outgoing, extroverted, and Virgo is a very introverted, feminine, passive sign. So there you have two expressions of Mercury as extroverted and introverted. So we have Mercury in Gemini, who might be that person who starts a new job and immediately goes around talking to everybody. I think I told you guys that there was a girl that I worked with who was born on the same day as me, different year, but she had an Aries ascendant and she had a Gemini moon. And I would walk in as a Capricorn with a Gemini ascendant and a Scorpio moon. Scorpio moon's tends to sort of be a bit more cautious about opening up to people. But my Gemini ascendant clashes with that. So I'm very like, hi, talk too much, say too many things, and then kind of regret what I've said. This girl would go around and go, hi, I'm Simone, and stick her hand out and like be very direct and introduce herself to everybody. And it's quite interesting to see how she operated as opposed to me. I'd get a bit chatty and friendly, but she was incredibly professional, sticks her hand out, shakes everybody's hand. This Gemini moon was at work. So I think that's quite a direct, she has a very cardinal energy to her chart anyway. And if you don't know what I mean by cardinal, if you haven't listened to the modes, I would strongly advise you to go back to the elements and the modes and really get into what they mean, because they're kind of the real the undercurrent of the signs and how they operate and how planets operate when they're in the signs as well. So it's very important to get into the modes and into the elements. So if you think about Virgo, and Mercury in Virgo as a passive expression of Mercury, it's a much more introspective, as Mercury is collecting information, collecting it all, doesn't care, just wants to know everything. Virgo is much more discerning. You could almost say that Gemini wants to know everything and is like very chatty and sociable, is that person that just talks to everybody, and doesn't really mind who they chat to, they just chat away. And Virgo might be more discerning and say, well, that person is a bit not too keen on their opinions. I don't really want to spend too much time talking to that person because it's just a bit of a waste of my time. I don't really particularly care for them. Not saying that Virgo's cold-hearted, but it's that they are able to discern whether or not it's useful to them. And so this is a process of going in and thinking, do I need this information? How is it helping me? How is it serving me? How will it serve me in my future? How can I apply this? Whereas Gemini Mercury would be very, have it all please, thank you, I'll have everything. I just want to keep it. Almost like an information hoarder. And Virgo can be the information cleaner. So thinking of Mercury as those two expressions, it's interesting to think about that in your own chart. Is Mercury in a passive or an active sign? Is it in a sign that is, reaching out, collecting information, or is it in a sign that's, being a bit more discerning? Is it being more introspective, introverted? Is it taking the information away and mulling it over in your mind a lot? Or is it, taking the information on, it's in the back of the mind and at some point you'll recall it at a pub quiz, but you're not really thinking too much about it. It's interesting to have a look at what Mercury's element and mode is in your chart. But on top of that, let's think about what Mercury is. Mercury is our brain. As far as the planets are concerned, Mercury is actually our thought process. And it could be argued that actually Mercury is one of the most important planets in the chart. It is actually, anyway, because it describes how you process information, and every single planet in the chart has to go through Mercury to be expressed. You cannot access any planet without it having to go through your brain and be processed and to be organised in a way that you can understand your environment and communicate with it. So it's our communication style, it's our thought process, it's how we relate to others. And I'm not talking about relationship-wise, but even just taking in what other people are saying and trying to understand, what the other person's trying to say, and how we react to what somebody says. So Mercury is really key, and it's almost like having a personal assistant. So it's almost like the sun's personal assistant. And, people say, I want to have an appointment with the sun in Capricorn, or the sun, let's do the sun in Cancer. So I want to have an appointment with the sun in Cancer. And Mercury says, that's fine, you can speak to the sun in Cancer, but what is it you want to say? Sun in Cancer is busy right now. You're going to have to tell me, I'll pass the message on. And however it is that Mercury takes that information and processes it, and how it gets relayed to your sun is how you are going to process that information for yourself, if that makes any sense at all. So actually Mercury is really important, and one of the most important things you can look at in relationship astrology, not only is the moon sign, it's also the Mercury sign. Mercury sign is so important. You can have, my ex I was with for 10 years, we did have communication issues, but we did have a Mercury conjunction. We both had Mercury in Aquarius. I think his was about 7 or 8, and mine's about 2. And we did have, like, we were really interested in similar things. Our conversations would last forever. It was really hard to have a 5-minute conversation. And people saw us as really good friends. And we had a great friendship. But the problem is that I had Saturn square my Mercury natally, and he had his Uranus was at the same degree as my Saturn, which happened to be squaring my Mercury. And at first it was like the brain was switched on to this, like, cranked up to like level 11, to quote Spinal Tap. This one goes up to 11. But it's like, the excitement for the things he had to say, the information, the things I was learning from him at the beginning was amazing. And then it got to the point where he constantly got annoyed with me because he thought I was interrupting him all the time. Very Mercury square Uranus. And I was always too serious. He'd say things that were like really out there and wacky. And I'd go, well, yeah, but what about this? I'd be too practical for him. So that Saturn square Mercury was just bringing it back down to earth. And I wasn't as spontaneous maybe for him as he'd have liked. We obviously had other synastry, but that Mercury conjunction was crazy. It was a really almost instant attraction. You almost immediately knew from talking you were just on the same page. And he had a Gemini moon as well. So my Gemini ascendant, his Gemini moon, and our Mercury conjunction, which is the signs ruled by Mercury, it was quite an important planet for us to have in conjunction. So if you're in a relationship with somebody, don't just look at the moon sign and where they are and what they mean. Also look at the Mercury sign, because it's also really important. If you have your Mercury square somebody else's Mercury, you can almost guarantee there's going to be misunderstandings. The important thing that you can get from Mercury square Mercury, if you can get over yourself and you can get over your opinion and your way that you think it should be done, and actually grow from looking at a different perspective that really challenges your own thoughts, that can be how you work it. So Mercury is really important, and it's not just the brain, it also rules the hands, the lungs, and really where the body divides in two as well. And obviously if we're looking at the Virgoan expression of Mercury as well, also rules the digestive system, which is about taking the nutrients that it needs and getting rid of the stuff that it doesn't. So like I said, that discerning process of, is this going to serve me or not? But also the nervous system as well. So like I said, some mercurial types are quite nervous. There was a woman that I was working with, and I just was like, she's so mercurial. She was very, very skinny, and her hair was like quite... she had short curly hair, and it was like kind of, her head was almost like she was like a lollipop really. She was like a very slim, skinny body, and she was always like, oh gosh, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, and she was just always quite nervy. And I thought, oh, she's definitely got to have Mercury rising or strong Mercury somewhere. And when I actually looked at her chart, she had Mercury rising in Cancer, the sign notorious for worrying. So Mercury rising in Cancer, they're going to be, and she's Cancerian as well, so just constantly worrying, and she's working in a healthcare context as well, worrying about other people and the care that she's providing. So yeah, it's very interesting because you can almost see it in people sometimes. So yeah, the key role for Mercury really is about mental connection, the communicative aspect, and the level of understanding that you have with any situation, but also with other people. You'll notice when you start looking at other people's charts, when you're collecting them, the sign that someone's Mercury is in. Because even if you don't have a conjunction, if you've both got Mercury in Aquarius, for example, like a few of my really close friends have that, or if they're in the same element, maybe so in air signs, you're going to have a great connection with somebody they're either in your element or they're in your sign. Whereas if they're in a sort of like, challenging aspect, so if they're in a sign that is square, so different element, and potentially even different, if you've got it in a different mode, for example. So if you've got somebody who's got a mutable Mercury sign and somebody who's got a fixed Mercury sign, their outlook is going to be so different. Somebody with a fixed Mercury is going to have a problem and they're going to just dwell on it. And, they'll come up with lots of ideas, but they're just going to feel stuck a lot of the time. And they may just talk about the same things over and over again. Whereas a mutable Mercury will take you on a little adventure, a little journey, and talk about all sorts of things, and then come back to the initial issue. It's very, sometimes chaotic, sometimes a bit all over the place, a bit like it needs to get reined in. So it's quite interesting when Mercury does rule Gemini and Virgo, so it's mercurial, mutability is quite mercurial anyway. If you think about the fact that Mercury, does move around the sun so quickly and goes backwards so many times a year. And actually in mythology as well, I believe that Mercury was the only planet that was able to speak to the sun and to speak to Apollo and to speak to Pluto as well. The god of the underworld could travel between, the heavens and, the underworld. So Mercury doesn't even have his own kingdom. Every other planet has their own kingdom, whereas Mercury doesn't. So it's interesting that Mercury is kind of in the true sense of the word, a wanderer. He's truly, he just he's a pilgrim. He goes on his little journeys and he visits. He's, flexible. He doesn't really need definition as such. So think about your mode, think about your element that your Mercury's in, and also if it's different to your sun and how that might colour your communication style and actually how you see the world. So I do have a good Mercury quote here. It says here, the more that you read, the more things you will know. The more you learn, the more places you'll go. And that's Dr. Seuss, which I quite like because I like Dr. Seuss anyway. And I think that we have to remember that nothing would exist if we didn't have a brain to process it through. Nothing would exist at all. So we wouldn't be able to even know what was going on around us. If there was an issue with our brain function, it affects everything. So really you have to think of the brain, Mercury as the brain and the nervous system. How nervy are you? How subjective or objective are you? This does boil down to other things like how sensitive you are, like your lunar placement and things like that. But actually, for a really good example, is me. I have Mercury in Aquarius, as I mentioned, and I also have my moon in Scorpio. So they're both fixed signs. One's water, and a Scorpio moon is known to be incredibly sensitive and incredibly kind of like boundaried and, defensive. And Mercury in Aquarius is kind of like very community focused and truth speaking, and very sociable and outgoing. So these two, like, one's introverted and introspective and passive, and one's outgoing and active and masculine, really. So we've got a masculine feminine dilemma here. And for me personally, if something upsets me, initially I completely and utterly, they say that the moon is the knee jerk. Most of the time I will feel like, oh my gosh, that really upset me, that hurt my feelings, or, whatever. And then I will kick into logic. So my moon will react, and because I've got a Scorpio moon, I can put on a really good poker face and go, okay, and not really give my game away. And then my Mercury will kick in and go, but they never meant it like that. It's fortunate that I've got that airy outlet for my sensitive watery moon. However, I do have Mars in Aquarius as well. So usually what happens is, if something upsets me, before logic kicks in, before even I know I'm upset, my anger would kick in. My Mars will go first. And if I get really upset, the very first thing I have to do is put my trainers on, go for a walk or go for a run. So I'll get on to Mars anyway, but it's just interesting how the planets work, and I can recognise it in my natal chart. It's very interesting to see. So some key words for Mercury. We've got articulate, communication, I like to pick out, I think I said about Russell Brand, probably when I was talking about, oh gosh, I might have been talking about mutability. I could have been talking about Gemini. Gosh, I don't even know what I was talking about. I've spoken about so many celebrities now. But Russell Brand is so verbose. He's a good one, actually, for looking at a mercurial type, because I think he's a Sun, Mercury in Gemini. I'll have a little look at his chart in a minute. But yeah, so somebody who might use unnecessary words in the conversation, just chuck it in there, long words that you could have just summed it up, differently. Trickster, it's quite youthful. Mercury's quite youthful. Self-expression, mental faculties, perception, rationality, reactivity. Now, at best, Mercury is expressive, talkative, intelligent, clever, perceptive, reasonable, discerning, witty and cool. And I do have to say that, we do have lots of different types of intuition. And I think intuition, not just through the moon and our inner feeling nature, but also through our intelligence as well. Sometimes you can have just a sense of understanding about something, or just a knowing. And I think Mercury could fall into that camp, actually, that kind of intuitive knowledge. So that's Mercury at his best. Now at his worst, he can be slick, nosy, critical, a bit of a chatterbox, quite nervous, amoral, opinionated, untrustworthy and unemotional. I think I've discussed air signs and how they can be a little bit too unemotional at times. It's not a terrible thing to be like that, but it can be if you disregard the human being behind what's happening. Empathy is something that, sometimes we have to learn about, but some people are born naturally with this ability to empathise. I'm watching The Crown at the moment. I think I've probably mentioned it already on Netflix. Oh my God, it's so good. The Queen is a classic. She's brilliant throughout the whole thing. One of my friends said that she's almost been cast as to be a little bit on the spectrum or something. And I never really saw it like that, actually. But I think she's just come from a very different upbringing where she just doesn't let her emotions get to her. She just doesn't act in an emotional way at all. And there was one episode where she said, I just struggle to cry. I just struggle. And she does. There are times when she does get upset. Not like she doesn't bawl her eyes out. But it's really interesting to see how she is so intellectual about everything. It's very interesting. But she's got, in her natal chart, she's got Capricorn rising and she's got Saturn in Scorpio on the midheaven, which I would say is the ultimate poker player. They really don't give the game away at all. And, I think that, Mercury as well, being potentially unemotional and untrustworthy. There are people that perhaps have a high-functioning Mercury or a strong Mercury placement who may struggle, like the logic kicks in over the emotion, which is fine. You are supposed to feel things, though. We are supposed to feel. We are supposed to let emotions out. It's important to do that. But some like to be rational and use logic above all else. And sometimes I envy that because I can be emotional. And sometimes I can think, why am I relying on my logic so much in this situation? I'm allowed to be upset about this, and it doesn't always work that way. So yeah, that's a little bit about Mercury. And yes, Mercury can get a little bit gossipy. This is the other thing. I think if we think about Gemini, and Gemini can lean towards gossip, so can Mercury a little bit. So if you've got a strong Mercury placement, try to avoid getting involved in idle gossip. It doesn't really serve anybody too well. One of the books that's really good for you to look at if you're really enjoying this podcast, my copy is absolutely tatty and falling to bits now, but I love it. It's called The Contemporary Astrologer's Handbook. I've had it now for about 10 years. Well, I think I joined the LSA. It's nearly 10 years ago. Oh my gosh. It's 9 years ago this year I will have joined the London School of Astrology. And this was one of the books that they gave us on our first day. It's written by Sue Tompkins, who was a teacher at the LSA. She used to be the principal, but not anymore. And she's fantastic. This book is great. And I do always refer to it because it's pretty much got everything you need as somebody starting out. It's got really everything. If you bought suppose if you bought one beginner's book, it's probably this book. And maybe that's because I was raised with this book as far as astrology is concerned. But it's got everything. And every time I go back and look at it, I find something else. And I just think, well, it's just fantastic. So that's 2 books I've recommended today. So now, like I said, I've got a lot of new charts to look at. I hope that was useful, by the way. Do let me know if you found it useful. Now, I've got, as far as listeners are concerned, I decided to pick out, it was really interesting because everybody had an interesting Mercury placement out of the newer people that have applied to be on the podcast. And I do apologise if I haven't recorded a show with you in. I have to go through and do an audit and look at who I've talked about and who I haven't. And I promise if you've submitted your chart, I will talk about you. But I just want to say thank you to Isabella, to Emma Lee, to Abby, to Ashley and to Alicia, who all submitted their charts to me, and to Art as well, who submitted your chart too. I've got all of these charts now, which I've gone through today and basically created an individual image that I'm going to be putting up on my website. And I'm still really behind on the podcast episodes, or like the blog posts. I'm really sorry. I will catch up. It is my mission to catch up, I promise. And I'm halfway there now because I've done all the charts. But okay, so firstly, I thought I'd look at Isabella H from Katoomba in Australia. And Isabella, you have got Mercury, you've got Sun in Virgo, and you also have Mercury rising in Libra. And you've got Moon in Aquarius. Oh, so we talked a bit about Aquarius today. It's quite airy. So you've got, air rising, an airy moon, and you've also got Mercury rising, which gives it that airy flavour. And then I suppose the airiest of the earth signs is Virgo. They're very much an analytical and logical earth sign. So this is, as far as thought process goes, being a Virgo, naturally you're going to be probably a bit more of a worrier. You've got a 12th house sun as well. So, I'm using equal house system, and I have done throughout the whole podcast. Oops, that was my cushion falling down behind me. But yeah, you've got a 12th house sun, which immediately makes it difficult to really know who you are. And you're drawn to subjects which are perhaps a little otherworldly, perhaps. So astrology isn't too far outside of that remit there, because it's something that is not necessarily provable. It's not really a scientific subject as such anymore anyway. And it definitely describes more of our humanity's underpinning features, drives and motivations. But, you're still a Virgo. In the 12th house of service, I would say that you're probably drawn to doing something charitable, giving back in some way, something spiritual maybe. There's definitely a sense of wanting to work with people, and it's not very boundaried either. But then you've got this Mercury, so it rules your sun. It definitely makes your sun, it's processing what your sun has to do, because not only is your sun connected to Mercury through the fact that Mercury has to communicate everything for your sun to understand, and any other planet, but it is the ruling planet of your sun because your sun is in Virgo. So it immediately puts any kind of, the planets in Gemini that you have, which you don't, but anyway, it makes the house that Gemini rules and also the house that Virgo rules kind of more important. And having Mercury rising in Libra, it might be that you are talking a lot about relationships. Other people probably are very important to you. And, you're probably somebody who is a good peacemaker, somebody who is able to keep the peace and very likeable. I can say this is a very sociable chart because you have got that Libra rising and you've also got that moon in Aquarius. So it's a very intellectual chart, I would say, actually. And, having Mercury rising as well, you're probably one of those people that just needs to have 2 of everything. You need to go out and buy a couple of things. Maybe it's you're always buying something for yourself and for your mum, or something for yourself and your sister or brother. But usually there's a reason to get 2. And it may be that you're somebody that just absolutely loves to have choices. What I will say, though, is that you might not be too good at making a decision. You know, Mercury is the planet that likes to have its options open. But Libra is a sign that really struggles to be decisive because it doesn't want to upset or offend anybody. So you end up either doing what other people want, or you may have nailed this communication style now and you're actually really good at convincing other people to do what you want without them even realising. So Mercury is at 16, nearly 17 of Libra, and your ascendant is at about 20 Libra. And so that just puts Mercury rising just in the 12th house as well. So it's quite close to the ascendant, so I will say that it's rising, but with the sun in the 12th house as well, there is definitely always a difficulty with really struggling to know who you are or what you're supposed to be doing, in a sense. And yet that moon in Aquarius does enjoy things like astrology and is very sociable, very friendly, and very, I'd say your social circle is very important to you, and you're probably incredibly likeable. But you do have quite a few planets in Scorpio. You've got Venus, Jupiter and Pluto there in Scorpio as well. So I'd say that though you have this kind of detached intellectual and analytical ability about you, there is also this need to go really deep. So you're not just a surface level person. It's not superficial chit chat. You probably need to have, you probably do have very specific interests that you have explored on a much deeper level. And I would say that relationships are very important to you, and you're probably a very committed person, just based on your Venus placement. But anyway, so that's Isabella. Do let me know, Isabella, if you liked what I had to say or if you disagree. I am on Instagram at Stellium Astro. Come and say hi. Who else have I got here? I did have another person who has, it's Emma Lee. And Emma Lee is in Huntingdon. I don't know which country that is now. It doesn't look like it's UK based on the coordinates. But anyway, so Emma Lee K, surname beginning with K, and I can't remember what it was now. You have loads of 12th house planets as well. You're a Virgo. And you have Sun, well, you've got, let's see, Pluto and Sun in the 12th house in Virgo, and Jupiter, Uranus rising in Libra, plus Libra rising at 13 degrees, and then you've got your Mercury at 14 degrees. Wow, look at all of that stuff, like just sitting on top of your ascendant. The Jupiter, Uranus is quite wide, but it's all in the 12th house anyway. So this is, probably somebody who attracts a lot of quirky types, very quirky types, and probably quite intense people as well. You might have to be, anybody with 12th house stuff seems to have to work through a lot of collective crap. You're kind of dealing with all of the stuff that falls in the 12th house is stuff that sometimes you're picking up other people's stuff. So you might be going through some issues, and it might be actually that your issue is boundaries, because other people that come into your life and they have all their problems, you get sucked into things like that. It's a very it's a challenging placement for any planets, really, but particularly if you've got your sun or your moon there, because you end up really low energy, exhausted, because you're just constantly taking on other people's stuff, and then you go home and you just can't. It's like you're picking stuff up in your aura almost, and you just have to clean yourself up a bit, and just it takes a lot of a 12th house person. Their aura is probably a lot bigger and it's picked up an awful lot more stuff. It's just a bit harder to clean. So I would recommend practicing good auric hygiene if you're a 12th house person. But yeah, you've also got Mercury rising in Libra too. So I would say that you probably also have issues with being indecisive. Having any 12th house planets as well also indicates that you may struggle with people who aren't always who they seem when you first meet them. So it could be that you have had to learn how to be a bit more assertive and stand your ground and be more selfish, because you've had to deal with a few people who have taken advantage of your good nature and your kind, not just diplomatic, but sometimes selfless, actions. So that's possible. Or you've got a Capricorn moon and Mars at 28 Sag, so you've got quite a tight Moon-Mars conjunction. So boundaries is a lesson for you. Definitely, you definitely need to learn about your boundaries and learn about, saying no to people. And I think that with a Capricorn moon, it's something that, you might have seen your mum like that and thought, I don't want to be like that. And then you get a bit older and you suddenly realise there's a reason why she was like that, because people take the pee. So possibly with you, Emily, and I'm sure we will talk about you again in another episode. I can't go on too long about each individual chart. I had some others. Each of them looked good, but I think I'm going to leave it at that for now. But thank you, everybody, for submitting your charts. And so let's have a look at the celebrity who I was going to look at. So actually, I did want to talk about a celebrity who I have brought up before on the podcast. His name, where's it gone? Hang on, let me call it up. There it is. So I mentioned Russell Brand. So if you just want to go on to astro.com, let me just put his name in quickly. If you don't know who Russell Brand is, he was in Forgetting Sarah Marshall, Get Him to the Greek. That's where he may be known in the US. In the UK, he is a comedian, stand-up comedian, who started getting quite outspoken about conspiracy theories and things, and spoke out against the establishment, and suddenly his career went a little bit down the pan. But he's got a very successful podcast called Under the Skin. If you go on his Instagram page, he's got a few million followers, and I don't really know what's going on with his podcast. I know he was trying to do a paid subscription model for the podcast, which no idea whether or not that's actually successful for him, but he puts little snippets on there all the time. It's really interesting. He's spoken to some really great guests, and who was the one that Brené Brown, he spoke to her as well. I think he's a big Brené Brown fan. But anyway, so Russell Brand, comedian, he was nicknamed Shagger of the Year by one of our red top newspapers over here in the UK. We've got 2 birth times for him, because he's mentioned, I think, in his autobiography, being born at midnight on the 4th of June. So that could be midnight the beginning of the day or midnight the end of the day. But either way, it puts his ascendant in Capricorn, and it puts Venus in Cancer on his descendant. But aside from that, he is a Sun Mercury in Gemini, and he is incredibly chatty. Even if you look at his side profile, when he was sort of like starting out, he had big, massive backcombed hair, really wild, crazy hair, and his side profile was just so mercurial. It was like really skinny, and he's very into like yoga and things like that, and he's a communicator. So I do always put down yoga as quite a Virgoan practice, because it's like it's the mind and the body, and then there's the spirit. I kind of feel like it's a very Virgo thing. It's about treating the body as a temple. So yeah, Russell Brand was a good one. I've just thought another really good one, who I generally do tend to talk about. Let's get her chart up quickly for you. I'm talking about Amy Winehouse here. Now Amy, I do love talking about Amy. She's another one who's quite lollipop shaped. She's got a very big head and a very skinny body. And she's got Gemini rising, and she has Sun Mercury in Virgo. And she is, if you don't know who Amy Winehouse is, I don't know where you've been. But, Amy is, without having to go into it too much, an absolute record-breaking performer, singer, musician. She got into jazz, and then she got into pop, and then got into drugs. And then it all kind of went downhill from there. And I could talk about her chart for a long time, endlessly. But really, I think for Amy, the problem with her was with this Mercury placement, Sun Mercury, she was incredibly self-critical. And, the Sun also describes the father, like I've said before. So if we think about her father, I believe he was a taxi driver in London. So usually quite a mercurial job, because taxi drivers have to kind of know the local area, know where they're going, driving around and things like that. So it's like having a map in the mind, and it's quite a humble job. It's hardworking, and again, she's got a Gemini ascendant as well. So she was a storyteller, and her music was all about stories, and that is Mercury there. He is the storyteller. So When you look at your chart, when you look at your ascendant, you generally are the planet that rules the ascendant. So for Amy, she is Mercury. For Russell Brand, let's have a look at what his chart is. So he's got Capricorn rising in both of his charts. So Russell would be Saturn, actually. But also we do have to remember that, there are the archetype for, masculine and feminine play into it as well. I was going to talk about somebody else. I think I talked about him on the Gemini episode, probably, is Gavin Bain. And it's somebody who's really interesting. I wrote about him in the book of music horoscopes. He he basically scammed the music industry, pretended he was from California, and he's a Scottish rapper basically. And him and his friend, who he met at college, Billy Boyd, both of them had Mercury in Gemini, but Gavin also has Sun and Venus in Gemini as well, and Gemini rising. So he's got Mercury on the ascendant in Gemini rising, and he also looks very mercurial. His hair is a little bit spiky, and it just looks like the little wings coming off of the head that you'd expect from that kind of mercurial look. But yeah, Gavin, I won't get into the story really long-winded. I'd strongly urge you to go and listen to, I'm sure it's the Gemini episode. I'll have to link it. I'll have to put a link at the bottom so you can go and explore Gavin's chart. But yeah, he fabricated a massive lie. He was a trickster, tricked the music industry, got a big recording contract. I won't go into too much detail about Gavin Bain because I have talked about him before. So I'll just share a link with some information about him, and he's fascinating. If you haven't watched the documentary, you need to watch it. You absolutely need to watch it and look at their birth charts as well, because it's fascinating. Anyway, so I'm going to call it a day. I'm going to leave it at that today, and just say thanks to everyone for tuning in. Get in touch and let me know if you've enjoyed it. If you're enjoying this podcast, please go on iTunes and give me a review and subscribe and rate me, just because it really helps other people to find and trust the podcast. And I have been getting some lovely feedback from you guys lately, so I'd really appreciate it if you could just go on there and just give me some love. And if you're listening, I'm on Instagram. I do try and keep up with my messages, but I've been kind of like not as active on Instagram lately. I've just been a bit tired and a bit quiet, so but I'm still there, so I will answer your messages. And yeah, like I said, I've got my Patreon page, which I'll put a link to in the description. So check out Patreon if you want to support the podcast. And yeah, that's it really. I hope you've enjoyed today. The personal planets, Mercury, 1 down, 2 to go. Next week we'll be talking about Venus. Take care, you guys. I'll speak to you soon.